The heavens declare the glory of God. New light in the Mazzaroth. The great controversy and the Creator's character vindicated at last, as prophesied in the Mazzaroth, his works, and revealed in the sanctuary, his word. Psalm 147, verses 4 and 5. He telleth the number of the stars. He calleth them all by their names. Great is our Lord and of great power. His understanding is infinite. Volume 1, researched by Odette Boily, was started on October 9, 2021, Gregorian reckoning, corresponding to the Feast of Trumpets of Leviticus 23, celebrated on the 1st of the 7th month of the biblical calendar. The Mazzaroth, a strategic planning to resolve the crisis of all ages. Let us remember that the Creator has a view of all the points, instead of us human beings who have only point of view. Taken from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 68. The plan of redemption had a yet broader and deeper purpose than the salvation of man. It was not for this alone that Christ came to the earth. It was not merely that the inhabitants of this little world might regard the law of God as it should be regarded, but it was to vindicate the character of God before the universe. Continuing with Patriarchs and Prophets, page 36, Thou had said in thine heart, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. Though all his glory was from God, this mighty angel, Lucifer, came to regard it as pertaining to himself, to dispute the supremacy of the Son of God, thus impeaching the wisdom and love of the Creator, had become the purpose of this prince of angels. Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 to 9. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither were their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 18, Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thy iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. Thus saith the Lord. The Table of Contents, Volume 1, The Mazzaroth and the Sanctuary, the Great Controversy in the Mazzaroth. Section 1, Part 1, The Book of Nature, His Works, His Creation. Part 2, The Book of the Law, His Word, His Wonderful Plan of Redemption. Section 2, Part 1, The Three Books in the Mazzaroth, His Works. Part 2, The Three Compartments in the Sanctuary, His Word. Section 3, Part 1, The Mazzaroth, the Sanctuary Connection and the Great Controversy. Part 2, The Mazzaroth, the Planisphere and Aries or Virgo. Part 3, The Ecliptic Line, the Path of the Sun and the Planets. The Mazzaroth and the International Astronomical Union IAU list. Section 1, Part 1, The Book of Nature, His Works, His Creation. Taken from Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 to 6. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them as he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Section 1, Part 2, the Book of the Law is Word, and the wonderful plan of redemption. Continuing with Psalm chapter 19, verses 7 to 14. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Section 1, Part 1, the Book of Nature is Works. Part 2, the Book of the Law is Word. As we look at the structure of Psalm 19 as a whole, A represents the verses 1 to 4 and points to the heavens. B, verses 4 to 6, in them as he set a tabernacle for the sun. The structure of Psalm 19 again as a whole, A, verses 7 to 10, points to the scriptures. B, verses 11 to 14, in them, and this is where the warning comes for his servant. Taking from the link that we have submitted to you below, we read, their sound went into all the earth, and their words, their teaching, message, instruction, according to the Hebrew meaning, unto the ends of the world. What words? What instruction? Whose message? Whose teaching? There is only one answer, and that is the heavens. This is settled by the fact that the passage is quoted from Psalm chapter 19, the first part of which is occupied with the revelation of God written in the heavens, which is concrete, which is part of the laws of nature, and the latter part with the revelation of God written in the Word, which is abstract and where the Creator enunciates his universal laws. This is the simple explanation of this beautiful psalm. This is why its two subjects are brought together. It has often perplexed many why there should be that abrupt departure in verse 7 with the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The fact is there is nothing abrupt in it, and it is no departure. It is simply the transition to the second of the two great revelations, which are thus placed in juxtaposition. The first is the revelation of the Creator Elohim, or El, in his works. And the second is the revelation of the covenant of Jehovah in his word. And it is noteworthy that while in the first half of the psalm, Elohim is named only once, in the latter half, Jehovah is named 7 times, the last being threefold, Lord, Rock, and Redeemer, concluding the psalm. Section 1, the Book of Nature, the Book of the Law, True Education. Continuing with Psalm 19, His Works, His Word. In the book, The Key to the Psalms, page 17, it is pointed out that the terms employed in A and B, verses 1 to 6, are astronomical, while in A and B, verses 7 to 14, they are literary. Thus, the two parts are significantly connected and united. When we read the whole passage and mark its structure and note the words employed, we are emphatically told that the heavens contain a revelation from God. They prophesy, they show knowledge, they tell of God's glory, and set forth His purposes and counsels. And this, of course, we're talking about Psalm 19. This research demonstrates the connection and unity of all the prophecies in the Mazzaroth as fulfilled by Messiah through the most complete, connected, and harmonious system of truth of the Bible, the sanctuary. These prophecies are the first coming of Messiah, His birth, His death on the cross, resurrection, ascension to heaven, and His works in the court, the holy place, and the most holy place. And then His second coming and third coming. These universal laws are illustrated through the Mazzaroth and the biblical synchronisms and chronology. It connects the woman of Revelation 12 with the final events of Earth history and the bride and the bridegroom, the 144,000, and the Son of Righteousness. The ultimate vindication of the character of God is also accomplished through the plan of redemption and His people as witnesses, completing then the message of the great controversy in the Mazzaroth and in the sanctuary. Section 2, Part 1. The three books in the Mazzaroth, His works, His creation. And Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, His word, and the wonderful plan of redemption. The three books in the Mazzaroth, which starts with Betula Virgo, forming the Ecliptic Line with the 12 cardinal constellations in their season, and is actually making up the line that the sun and the planets follow during a whole year. This is why it's called the Ecliptic Line, of which we will speak about later in this research. When we look at it, we can see the perfect plan of the Creator in creating a tabernacle for the sun. The sanctuary has also three compartments, and these three compartments represent the plan of salvation, first in the court, followed with the works of Christ in the holy place, and then finishing His work in the most holy place, of which we will also present the fullness of this understanding by His grace during this research. This is indeed bringing together creation, redemption, and true education as one. Section 2, Part 1, the three books in the Mazzaroth, His works, His creation. Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, His word, the wonderful plan of redemption. This section is divided in two parts. Part 1, the three books in the Mazzaroth, His works, His creation, and Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, His word, the plan of redemption, the great controversy, and vindicating the character of God. Part 1, the three books in the Mazzaroth, His works and creation. This research includes the 12 cardinal and the 36 Deacon Constellations for a total of 48 constellations. It explains the purpose of each book and the meaning of the Cardinal and Deacon Constellations. Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, His Word, the wonderful plan of redemption, the great controversy, and vindicating God's character. This research connects the three compartments of the sanctuary and their significance in the plan of redemption with the Mazzaroth through the prophecies already fulfilled and other prophecies still to be fulfilled. We are reminded in the Great Controversy, page 489, that the intercession of Christ in man's behalf in the sanctuary above is as essential to the plan of salvation as was his death upon the cross. By his death he began that work which after his resurrection he ascended to complete in heaven. This statement from the pen of inspiration, supported by the three compartments in the sanctuary, discard the erroneous teaching that everything was finished at the cross. Though the sacrificial offerings were finished or fulfilled at the cross, according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it does not discard Christ's ministerial work of continual atonement in the court, perpetual intercession in the holy place, and final atonement and final intercession in the most holy place. And the Mazzaroth illustrates these facts. The main objective of this research, with its historical and present-day applications, is to vindicate the character of God and show the way to eradicate the great controversy by becoming God witnesses. According to Isaiah chapter 43, verses 10, 12, and 25, God declares, "You are my witnesses. I am he that blotted out thy transgressions for my own sake." So therefore, in order to become his witnesses, we have to have an experience of the blotting out of sins in the most holy place, the blotting out of the records of our sin in the most holy. So it does involve the fullness of the sanctuary in our lives. Section 2, Part 1, the structure of the three books of the Mazzaroth, his works, his creation. Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, his word, his wonderful plan of redemption. In the first chapter of the first book of the Mazzaroth, we have the same Blessed One presented as a corn or a grain of barley, pointing to the first fruits and the wheat. Here we see him come to die, and hence not abiding alone, but bringing forth much fruit, as found in Exodus chapter 9, verses 31 and 32, Revelation chapter 14, verses 3, 4, and 15, pointing to the barley, the 144,000, and the wheat, the great multitude, as found in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, chapter 14, verse 17, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 23, Matthew chapter 13, verse 39, and John chapter 12, verse 24. The living fish proceeds from the dying goat, and yet they form only one body, according to Capricornius, Getty. That picture, which has no parallel in nature, has a perfectly true counterpart in grace, and a great multitude, which no man can number, have been redeemed, and shall obtain eternal life through the death of their Redeemer. It is, however, not merely the actual death which is set before us here. The first chapter in each book has for its great subject the person of the Redeemer in prophecy and promise. The last chapter of each book has for its subject the fulfillment of that prophecy in victory and triumph in the person of the Redeemer. The two central chapters in each book are occupied with the work, which is the accomplishment of the promise, presented in two aspects, the former connected with grace, the latter with conflict. And we're talking here about the conflict of the ages, the great controversy. Section 2, Part 1, the structure of the three books in the Mazzaroth, His works, His creation. Part 2, the three compartments in the sanctuary, His word, His wonderful plan of redemption. Referring back now to the Word of God, in Exodus chapter 9, verses 31 and 32, we are about ready to discover more beautiful truth coming out of the Mazzaroth, but also coming out of the sanctuary. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bold. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. This is the first prophecy revealed through the Mazzaroth. Barley ripens in Israel by the second week of April, Gregorian reckoning, corresponding to the first biblical month. In Leviticus chapter 23, we find the feast of Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, or the spring feast. And this corresponds to barley. The wheat ripens in Israel around the end of May, the beginning of June, Gregorian reckoning, corresponding to the third biblical month. According to Leviticus 23, this is when the Feast of Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks, is celebrated. So therefore, in this wonderful truth of the barley and the wheat, now we have a revelation of the Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost. Continuing now with Revelation chapter 14, verses 3, 4, and 15. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Trust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Second prophecy. First harvest of Revelation chapter 14, verse 15, to ripen and be harvested is the 144,000, which corresponds to the barley, the first fruits. The first fruits being barley in Israel. Therefore, we have here again, according to Leviticus 23, another wonderful revelation, the Passover, the unleavened bread, and the first fruits, followed by Pentecost. And this is the exact order that you will find for the feast of the Lord in Leviticus 23. So these are wonderful prophecy directly coming from the Mazzaroth and its timeline, and corresponding to the spring feast, as we start with Virgo Betula. Now, as we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 23, Christ the firstfruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming, third prophecy. So now we have another confirmation that is wonderful, is not only the 144,000 are the firstfruits unto the Lord, but Christ himself is the firstfruit, and afterward they that are Christ at his coming. So that unites then the 144,000 with the Lord himself when he comes again. Revelation chapter 7, verse 4, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and they were sealed 144,000. Fourth prophecy. John heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, and chapter 14, verse 17. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb. And another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. This is the fifth prophecy. The great multitude is the second harvest. The 144,000 is the first harvest. The first harvest corresponding to barley, therefore the great multitude has to correspond to the wheat. Second harvest in Israel. And who are the great multitude? John chapter 12 verse 24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Sixth prophecy. Here, our Messiah is actually confirming the second harvest of Revelation chapter 14, the great multitude, with the second harvest of Israel, the wheat. And in Hebrew, the word corn simply represents grain, except a grain of wheat. It is not the same as what we use in English as this other type of grain, which we call corn. Notice that the second harvest is the wheat, the great multitude, according also to Matthew chapter 13, verse 39. So therefore now, with the second harvest, we are entering into another phase of the study of the feast, bringing in trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. Though the wheat is in the spring, it is the second harvest which we are to expect, and we know too that there is a third harvest in Revelation which has to do with the grapes, which has to do with the wicked. But at this time, we want to concentrate mainly on the feast and having to do with the harvest of the righteous. So once the harvest of the spring, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruit is past, which is the harvest of barley, we have a second harvest, the wheat at Pentecost, with the Holy Spirit coming on the apostle after Christ ascended to heaven. And the great multitude here is represented as the second harvest, the wheat harvest, followed as we can go back to the book of Revelation and discover the grape harvest, which brings in the fall feast. The spring feast have to be recognized and reckoned before we can ascertain the fall feast. So again, the great multitude, the wheat is the second harvest, and the barley, the 144,000, is the first harvest, the first fruit unto the Lord, according to this wonderful teaching. So this is all coming out from our study now of Mazzaroth and the sanctuary combined together. These are the wonderful, wonderful parables that the Lord chooses to hide away and only can be found if we seek, and we shall find. This is to the glory of our Creator. Section 2, Part 1. The very important study of the structure of the three books of the Mazzaroth, his works, his creation. Part 2, the three compartments of the sanctuary, his word, his wonderful plan of redemption. The structure of each of the three books consists of the repetition of a group of words in reverse order, having for its first and last chapters the person of the Redeemer, as shown here in this chart. In A, in prophecy, in A, in fulfillment. While in the two central chapters, we have the works and its accomplishment, in B, in grace, in B, in conflict. These conflicts point to the great controversy, both introduced and finalized by the Mazzaroth in the sanctuary, and to vindicate at last the Creator's character. It is thus presented, including the three sanctuary compartments. The first book points to the court, where we have the early reign and the kingdom of grace that was received at the first coming of Messiah. The first chapter in the first book is Virgo Betula, the prophecy of the bruised seed. These chapters are actually the Cardinal constellation, which makes up the Ecliptic Line, and which are divided in three books, having then 4 chapters per book. And we have here the perfect application of the structure for the first chapter of the first book, as the person of the Redeemer in prophecy, which is fulfilled by Betula, the prophecy of the bruised seed. Continuing then with the last chapter of the first book, we have Sagittarius Cachet, which is the fulfillment of the promised victory, just like the structure is indicating here. Then we have the two central chapters of the first book, consisting of Libra, Mosname, and Scorpio Aquave, and their meaning is Libra, Mosname, the work accomplished in grace, and Scorpio Aquave, the fulfillment of the work accomplished in conflict. Again, a repetition of the Great Controversy, introduced here for the first time in Book 1 through Scorpio Aquave. Very important message and structure to understand. The second book points to the holy place. The holy place where we continue with the early reign, the establishment of the kingdom of grace, while Christ has returned now to heaven after accomplishing the sacrificial offering in the court. This is again a antitype of the type found in the sanctuary in the wilderness in the Old Testament, now being fulfilled by Messiah. The first chapter of the second book is Capricornus Gedi, which means the prophecy of the promised deliverance, again in the person of the Redeemer, and this time for his redeemed. So we have again an application of the structure in prophecy, which is the promise of deliverance, and the last chapter of the second book, Aries Tole, which is the fulfillment of the promised deliverance. Again, a prophecy, a fulfillment. The structure is met for the second book, and the two central chapters of the second book are Aquarius Deli, the result of the work bestowed in grace, and Pisces Dagim, the result of the work enjoyed in conflict. Again, the perfect fulfillment or application of the structure of the books of the Mazzaroth. Passing now to the third book, pointing to the most holy place in the sanctuary, we have here the latter rain, the kingdom of glory, first of the purification of the mind, and at the second coming of the new body. Looking again at the first chapter of the third book, we have here Tor or Torres, which means prophecy of the coming judge of all the earth. Again, another prophecy, as the structure is showing so well here in the person of the Redeemer in A, in prophecy. In this case, it's in E. We have the prophecy of the coming judge of all the earth. The last chapter of the third book is Leo Arie, which means the fulfillment of the promised triumph at the third coming. Again, which is perfectly in line with the structure of the Mazzaroth and its three books. Looking now at the central chapters of the third book, we have Gemini or Gemini, Theomame, and the Redeemer's reign, grace and glory. Here is the second coming. Then we have again the central chapter of the third book, Cancer, Sartan, which means the Redeemer's possession, safe from all conflict. And all of these wonderful chapters of the three books made up of the Cardinal constellations in their season, forming the Ecliptic Line, totally and perfectly fulfill the structure as described here and presented in this chart in order to demonstrate the importance of knowing this wonderful truth of both the Mazzaroth and the sanctuary for the great controversy is perfectly introduced and also finalized to those two very important, we could call them the wonderful divine institutions that the Lord has given us and He's permitting us now to definitely see them restored. And we know that this is according to God's will. So we are praising the Lord for such a mind as this, that He would think about hiding in plain sight the plan of redemption in the stars and in the sanctuary, but also, most of all, the great controversy to be introduced and finalized and finally vindicate His wonderful character. Such a wisdom as this, we cannot attain it. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth or Planisphere, and Aries or Virgo. Part 2, the Mazzaroth and the Sanctuary Connection. The popular beginning of the Mazzaroth or Planisphere in the past and today is with Aries or Tole, the ram, and concludes with Pisces or Dagim. But comparing this revelation with that which was afterward written in the volume of the book, which is the Bible, Virgo Vetula is the only point where we can intelligently begin, and Leo Aries is the only point where we can logically conclude. Here we have Aries Tole, which is used to this day, and in the past it was used as the beginning of the cycle and finishing with Pisces Dagim. What is proposed here is beginning with Virgo Vetula, according to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. That's what it's meant here with this revelation. And it will then conclude with Leo Aries, and then the cycle will start again. Beginning then with Virgo, let us now spread out the contents of this heavenly volume so that the eye can take them in at a glance. The pictures that we will be presenting are ancient and have come down to us from primitive times. After the revelation came to be written down in the scriptures, which is the Bible, there was not the same need for the preservation of the heavenly volume, or the Mazzaroth. And after the nations had lost the original meaning of the pictures, they invented a meaning out of the vain imagination of the thoughts of their hearts, namely astrology or spiritualism. The Greek mythology is an interpretation of only some of the signs and constellations after their true meaning had been forgotten. It is popularly believed that Bible truth is an evolution from or development of the ancient religions of the world. But the fact is that they themselves, those ancient religions of the world, are a corruption and perversion of primitive truth, especially when we consider that the Mazzaroth, again, is made up of 3 books, and the sanctuary is made up of 3 compartments. And as we continue this research, it will be demonstrated that these two, the Mazzaroth and the sanctuary, are definitely connected. Section 3, Part 3, the Ecliptic Line, the Path of the Sun and Planets. Psalm 19, verses 1 to 3, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. The biblical geography of the heavens based on the Creator's universal laws, the ecliptic line, the path of the sun, and planets. Another wonderful revelation coming from Psalm 19, verses 4 to 6. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them has he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Looking at Job chapter 38 verse 5, God is asking this question to Job: who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it? As we recognize now a correspondence with the word line here mentioned in Psalm 19 and line mentioned here in Job 38 verse 5, we have to recognize that the Lord is wanting to reveal something to us. And this revelation is found in the Mazzaroth and the Planisphere, the Ecliptic Line, which is an extrapolated line in the sky made up of the 12 cardinal constellations, which marks the annual path of the sun and planets. That's why it's called the cardinal constellations, or the 12 signs in their seasons. The moon travels the ecliptic line north and south monthly. As we look now at the Mazzaroth and the Planisphere, which are basically a representation of both of each other, we have here the Mazzaroth, and to make up the ecliptic line, we simply have to follow the path of the 12 cardinal constellations in their seasons, and this is what the scientists in astronomy have called the ecliptic line. It's an astronomical name, ecliptic line, which is also found in the Planisphere, which is here represented. And we know that Betula Virgo is our starting point, which shows around January, February Gregorian reckoning. And its studies is basically showing us that we always go from the east to the west, the same as when we talk about the planispheres, the path of the stars are from the east to the west, from our point of view here on Earth. And of course, these stars are moving just like the whole universe is expanding and moving constantly. But they can be traced in the sky. And what we call extrapolated line is better understood here as we look at this particular constellation, Scorpio, and you see all the stars that makes up like dots on this image here. And the lines that are brought together are called extrapolation. In the sky, you will not see these lines. It's like children playing with those kind of a design where you have dots and you extrapolate them, and that will give you animals like a little dog or something. This is called extrapolation. So Scorpio here is made up by extrapolation of the stars, creating some little dots, and the line in between are basically imaginary, but they do form this wonderful, wonderful constellation. And you can do the same with every one of these constellations and form what we're going to see as the pictures in the sky. In astronomy, a planisphere is a star chart analog computing instrument in the form of two adjustable discs that rotate on a common pivot, and it can be adjusted to display the visible stars for any time and dates. So here you can see the time, AM, PM, so you have to adjust it according to when you are looking at the stars, along with the date with the month. The planispheres are actually an instrument to assist us in learning how to recognize stars and constellations. Very, very beautiful instrument, and they're available for the north and south hemispheres depending where you live, and they are available online. You can purchase them online. So this is a wonderful, wonderful application of the Mazzaroth into the planisphere, which are corresponding with each other. And the difference with this particular Mazzaroth here that does not show the Deacon constellation, you notice that in the planisphere you always have all of the Deacon constellation along with the Cardinal constellation. We want to show you another marvelous revelation of, again, found in Psalm 19. In this psalm, we have not only the line, but we also have a tabernacle, which is formed by this line, the ecliptic line, for the sun. Now, if we do an allegory, or what we call, this is the concrete and this is the abstract, this is the concrete and the abstract is the sanctuary, we're going to look now at The tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiced as a strong man to run a race. Where is that applicable in the sanctuary? Well, Christ is the bridegroom that comes for his bride, and he came first, literally on the earth, as the Son of God and the Son of Man, and he died on the cross to begin the work of redemption that he promised in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, represented by Betula, Virgo, in the wonderful Mazzaroth. So here we have the bridegroom coming on the earth, first to die, both the victim and both the priest. And he comes, and now as he finishes work in the court, he enters into the holy place according to prophecy in 31 AD to continue now to his work of redemption and to complete it in the most holy place, according to the prophecy of Daniel 8:14, 9:24-27, which corresponds to 1844. So here we have the circuit that is talked about in the Psalm 19, but this time it is the true circuit of the Son of God, Son of Man. And when he enters from one compartment to the other, in this case, the court, when he came to the earth, the holy place, when he continued his work of redemption, which he began here in the court at the cross, and completed in the most holy place for his righteous people. Now we can follow him in another circuit where he's returning to the earth at the second coming, and then again, as he returned to heaven with his righteous for 1,000 years, he is returning again to the earth to come with the holy city filled with his righteous, and now make a new heaven and a new earth after the wicked are destroyed with Lucifer and his fallen angel. It's a long, beautiful story that finally lasts until the third coming, and we see now the earth restored and returned to his first steward, Adam and Eve, and his descendant. Wonderful, wonderful stories in the sky through the picture of the Mazzaroth, but also to the wonderful Word of God in the sanctuary. And here is his tabernacle, the holy place and the most holy place, where Christ is still finishing the work, completing the work of redemption in the most holy place. So this is the tabernacle of the Son of Man, Son of God, which is to come as a bridegroom to come now for his bride, which he will bring it back to heaven for 1,000 years and then return and establish at the third coming and give us a new heaven and a new earth. This is actually the wonderful story in the stars, and it is fulfilled through the biblical sanctuary. Glory to the Lord for such a wonderful truth, both in his works and in his word. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars. Showdown. Part 2, the Mazzaroth and the sanctuary connection. Continuing with his works and his word. It is a remarkable fact that it is in the book of Job, which is generally allowed to be the oldest book in the Bible, if not in the world, that we have references to this stellar revelation. This would be at least 2,000 years before Christ. In that book, the signs of the Mazzaroth, or zodiac, meaning the way, and the names of several stars and constellations are mentioned as being ancient and well known. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 26, we read, "Lift up your eyes on high, and see who hath created these, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and for that he is strong in power, not one is lacking." We have the same evidence in Psalm 147, verse 4. "He telleth the number of the stars, and giveth them all their names." Here is a distinct and divine declaration that the great Creator both numbered as well as named the stars of heaven. The stellar revelation in Job chapter 9, verse 9, which maketh Arcturus the bear, Orion and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. In margin, in Hebrew, we have the words Ash, Cecile, and Sema. In Job chapter 38, verses 31 and 32, we read, Canst thou bind the sweet influences or cluster of the Pleiades? In margin, the 7 stars, in Hebrew, Sema, or loose the bands of Orion? In margin, Hebrew, Cecile. Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth? Margin, the 12 signs, or the 12 signs, and margin, the signs of the zodiac, in his season. Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons, the bear with her train, and margin, Hebrew, sons. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the star. Showdown. Part 2, the Mazzaroth and the sanctuary connection. In Isaiah chapter 13, verse 10, we read, the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof. Amos chapter 5, verse 8, seek him that maketh the 7 stars, the Pleiades and Orion. Then we have the term Mazzaroth in Job chapter 38, verse 32, and Mazzaroth in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 5. The former, in the book of Job, in both versions is referred to the 12 signs of the zodiac, while the latter, in the book of 2 Kings, it is rendered planets, and in margin the 12 signs or constellations. Others are referred to by name. The sign of Gemini or the twins is given as the name of a ship in the book of Acts chapter 28 verse 11 as Castor and Pollux. Most commentators agree that the constellation of Draco or the dragon between the great and little bear is referred to in Job chapter 26 verse 13. By his spirit he hath garnished the heavens. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent, in margin the fleeing or gliding. In Isaiah chapter 27 verse 1 we read, in that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. This word garnish is peculiar. In Psalm chapter 16 verse 6 it is rendered goodly. I have a goodly heritage. In Daniel chapter 4 verse 2 it is rendered, I thought it good to show, referring to the signs and wonders with which God had visited Nebuchadnezzar. It appears from this that God thought it good to show by these signs written in the heavens the wonders of his purposes and counsels, and it was by his Spirit that he made it known. It was his hand that coiled the crooked serpent among the stars of heaven. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars, will be compared to the list appointed by the International Astronomical Union, IAU. The ancient list appointed by the Creator is made up of 48 constellations, 12 cardinal, and 36 deacon. In Isaiah chapter 40 verse 26 we read, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringing out their hosts by number? He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, not one faileth. Psalm chapter 147 verse 4, he telleth the number of the stars, he calleth them all by their names. The list appointed by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, edited. We have submitted here 2 lists, the original one and the edited one, for your perusal. The ancient designated list appoints the Creator as having given the names of the 48 ancient constellations. The additional 40 constellations were created, listed, introduced, and adopted by Dutch celestial cartographers in the era of 1592 to 1614 by Johann Zevelius after 1687, by Nicolas Louis de Lacaille after 1756, and we read in the link that we submitted to you here, in contemporary astronomy, 88 constellations are recognized. Each constellation is a region of the sky. Together, they cover the entire celestial sphere, with their boundaries adopted officially by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, in 1928 and published in 1930. As declared in Isaiah 40 verse 26 and Psalm 147 verse 4, the Ancient of Days numbered and called the constellations of the Mazzaroth by names. The ancient 12 cardinal identified in red and the 36 Deacon constellations identified in blue are edited and numbered 1 to 48 as numbered and named by the Creator, while the 40 constellations are not numbered in the IAU list or the edited one. The 12 cardinal constellations are not in the order they appear on a monthly basis, but are in alphabetical order in the IAU list. It will be demonstrated that the 40 constellations of IAU are man-made addition and they are not approved by the Creator. And the warning is, ye shall not add unto the word. Notice that the editing of the IAU list of 88 constellations is for educational purposes only, and it was edited by 144,000 teachers. Showdown. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2, ye shall not add unto the word, neither shall ye diminish out from it. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars. Comparing it to the list appointed by the International Astronomical Union, IAU. The ancient list appointed by the Creator, as we saw, is made up of 48 constellations, 12 cardinal, and 36 deacon. As confirmed in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 26, it is the Creator who created all things, who numbered and called the stars by their names. And it is also confirmed by Psalm chapter 147 verse 4. He, the Creator, numbered the stars and he called them all by their names. The list appointed by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, made up of 40 deacon constellations, reveals some important historical points. The 40 constellations from the IAU, as we saw, were created, listed, introduced, and adopted by Dutch celestial cartographers from 1592 to 1614, which coincidentally was during the Protestant Reformation, which started in 1517. In 1756, more constellations were added, and it was followed by the independence of the United States of America in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, and the wound inflicted to the beast of Revelation 13 in 1798. In contemporary astronomy, 88 constellations were recognized, as we saw, by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, in 1928, and it was published in 1930. Again, another historical coincidence, at the same time, the papacy was restored as a church and state government in 1929 by Mussolini, the fascist ruler of Italy at the time. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 26 and Psalm 147 verse 4 confirmed that the Ancient of Days numbered and called the constellations by names. This is to make up the Mazzaroth. The ancient 12 cardinal and the 36 deacon constellations were numbered 1 to 48, and they were named by the Creator. However, the men named 40 constellation by IAU have no connection with the Mazzaroth. Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19 gives us another warning, and it will be demonstrated that this warning, though given in the book of Revelation by Christ himself, is applicable for the ancient Mazzaroth today. For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. And here starts the showdown. Showdown as revealed in the prophecy. Let us remember the warning in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2. Ye shall not add unto the word, neither shall thou diminish from it. Section 3, part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars. The harvest of barley, pointing to the 144,000. The harvest of wheat, pointing to the great multitude. The Creator numbered and named the constellations which compose the Mazzaroth, as revealed in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 26 and Psalm chapter 147 verse 4. The Ancient of Days numbered and called the constellations by names. In the book of Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19, we find another warning similar to Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2, which do not apply only to the book of Revelation, but to all the words of the prophecy as found in the Bible and in the Mazzaroth. For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. Barley, as we have already seen, points to the 144,000, while the wheat points to the great multitude. It is indeed a wheel within a wheel. The 12 cardinal and the 36 deacon constellations prophesy of the judgment of the righteous. The barley and wheat spring and early summer harvest in Revelation chapter 14 verses 14 to 17, and the 144,000, which are the first fruit and the great multitude, are revealed in the Mazzaroth and the most holy place of the biblical sanctuary. In Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 in the margin, we have an expression, the great numberer, which defines in the Bible the system of numerology. In number 12 in the Bible, we see the number of the kingdom of God. The number 48, as per the constellations in the Mazzaroth, is a multiple of 12 multiplied by 4, where we find the full plan of salvation in the sanctuary written in the stars and of the great controversy. The 12 cardinals, pointing to the barley and pointing also to the 144,000, which is a multiple of 12 multiplied by 12,000, as it is found in the book of Revelation chapter 7 verses 4 to 8 and Revelation chapter 14 verses 14 to 16. The 36 deacon constellations, which points to the wheat, The number 36 now is a multiple of 12 as well, multiplied by 3. And we know in Revelation chapter 7 that the great multitude is mentioned there and represented in chapter 14, verse 17 as the harvest, and also the book of Matthew chapter 13, verse 39. It is indeed a wheel within a wheel when we study the number 12 in the Bible. The 12 tribes are found in Genesis chapter 49, Ezekiel 48, and Revelation 7. The 12 apostles are found in the 4 Gospels, and the 12 gates and the 12 foundations of the holy city are found in the book of Revelation chapter 21, verses 10 to 21. The 144,000, the righteous living, are numbered in the Bible in the book of Revelation, and the great multitude of all nations, tongues, and peoples have their names written in the book of life. As well, the righteous living, which names are in the book of life, have gone through the judgment in the most holy place and have pardon written in their records in the book of records. They are now prepared for the close of probation, soon to be followed by the second coming, and as illustrated in the books 1, 2, and 3 of the Mazzaroth. We recommend that you read the book The Great Controversy, chapter 28 and on, for further understanding. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars. The harvest of barley, pointing to the 144,000. The harvest of wheat, pointing to the great multitude. Following the reference given, now we are presenting the verses. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 26. Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number? He called them all by names, by the greatness of his might. For that he is strong in power, not one faileth. This is the first prophecy. Psalm 147, verse 4, he telleth the number of the stars. He called them all by their names. The second prophecy. Revelation chapter 14, verses 14 to 17, and I looked, and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Trust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reap. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. This is the third prophecy. Daniel chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long? Unto 2,300 days. In the margin, that saint is named the wonderful numberer, which would be the Creator. And this is the fourth prophecy. Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 to 8. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and they were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben, of the tribe of Gad, of the tribe of Asher, of the tribe of Naphtali, of the tribe of Manasseh, of the tribe of Simeon, of the tribe of Levi, of the tribe of Issachar, of the tribe of Zebulun, of the tribe of Joseph, of the tribe of Benjamin, were sealed 12,000. This is the fifth prophecy. Matthew chapter 13, verse 39, the enemy that soweth them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angel. This is the sixth prophecy. Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 and 14. And at a wall great and high, and at 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. and the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. This is the seventh prophecy. For the hour of his judgment has come. Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. Final showdown as revealed in prophecy, the final trial. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars, the prophecy. The IAU, a man-made constellations list pointing to the grape harvest and the tear, as we find also in prophecy. The IAU stands for the International Astronomical Union and has a list of 40 constellations which was added and points to the grape harvest and the tares. It is indeed a wheel within a wheel. The 40 constellations named by the IAU, as we saw, are a type of those who believe they can be saved by their own works. Their number and names are not written in the Book of Life and are not written in the Mazzaroth, and they are found wanting in the judgment. The 40 constellations of the IAU fulfill the prophecy of the fall harvest of sour grapes as defined in the book of Revelation chapter 14 verses 18 to 20 by the vines, and also the tares in the book of Matthew chapter 13 verses 25 to 38. The biblical synchronism of the number 40 in the Bible relates to unbelief, testing, punishment, and temptation. Again, the great numberer reveals these truths in his word. The 40 days of rain, followed by an immense flood which destroyed the earth, is found in Genesis chapter 7, verse 12. This was a punishment on unrepentant people which Noah preached to for 120 years. Notice that 120 is a multiple also of 12 multiplied by 10. Another 40 days referring to spying the land in Numbers chapter 13 verse 25, which was testing the people of God at the time. However, 12 spies were sent and 10 of them failed to give a good report about that land because of unbelief. And because of this, their punishment was great. Instead of 40 days of spying the land, now they were doomed to pass 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And only a remnant came out of that wilderness, along with the two faithful spies, Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua became then the leaders instead of Moses. We find this truth in Numbers chapter 14 verses 33 and 34. And this was again a punishment due to unbelief. Another 40 days is found in the book of Matthew chapter 4 verses 1 to 11, and it is the temptation of Messiah in the desert. However, the good news is this time it represents victory on the behalf of Christ over appetite, unbelief, and false worship. And it is an example unto all of us that have come unto the end. Another big number in the Bible that has been questioned for centuries is the number 666 as to its definition. Failure upon failure upon failure. We find this number in Revelation chapter 13 verse 18, and it's part of the prophecy of 1260, which is also a multiple of 12. When you multiply it by 105, you obtain 1260. This man-made work of the IAU is the work of the man of sin spoken of in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 1 to 12, and of the wicked. The number 66 points to Lucifer, the morning stars, which the pagan used to call Venus. But Venus, for those who study astronomy, know that Venus is a planet and not a star. It is a planet that rises in the morning, so just like Lucifer was called when he was pure and true to God, the morning star. And actually it becomes an allegory that the pagan called Lucifer Venus, which is a planet, and a planet only reflects light, do not produce light. And unhappily, that's what Lucifer forgot, and all those who follow him, that Lucifer was to reflect the light of his maker. He did not produce his own life and in his own light. This is what we need to remember. For all of us, we are basically like a planet. We are reflecting the light of our maker. We do not possess that light on our own, lest we forget. The number 6 in the Creator's numerology is the number representing man. We find this in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 16, that it actually points to all created being. Even Lucifer in Isaiah is called a man. 666 means failure upon failure upon failure of a man. And it can be demonstrated that Lucifer, which is called the created being, a man, in the book of Isaiah, we can see his failure when he first attempted to take over God's throne in heaven and was cast out on the earth. This is found in Isaiah chapter 14, Ezekiel 28, and Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. But there is another series of failure after he sinned and was cast onto the earth. And this is the 666 number to which we want to refer those failures. Lucifer on the earth tried to destroy the seed of the woman at the first coming of Messiah, but Messiah conquered death. This was the first failure on the earth of Lucifer, the first number 6. Lucifer attempted to annihilate the woman for 1260 years, from 538 to 1798, according to the prophecy of Daniel 7:25, but we know that he failed. And this is revealed in the book of Revelation as well, chapter 12, and this is second failure, another number 6. Then Lucifer will attempt, we're told, to destroy the woman for 1260 days, according to Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, and the same chapter, Revelation chapter 12, verses 14 to 17. And this will be his third failure, making up the number 666. But God's people will be delivered by Christ at his second coming, which in the book of Revelation chapter 20 verse 5 is called the first resurrection. Lucifer and his fallen angel will wander the desolate earth for 1,000 years with no one to tempt, according to the book of Revelation chapter 20 verses 1 to 6. After Lucifer's failed attempt to take over the New Jerusalem, fire comes from the throne of God on Lucifer, his fallen angels, and the wicked to destroy them all forever. And this is found in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 7 to 15. And this points to the third coming, which is called in the Bible, in chapter 20 of Revelation, the second death. The second coming in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, is called the first resurrection, but the third coming is called the second death, and this applies to the wicked. Indeed, it is a final showdown of the great controversy of the crisis of the ages, which is revealed very clearly in the words of the prophecy, which is found in the Bible and in the Mazzaroth. And indeed, it becomes the final trial. And this is assured as the victory is given to Christ and his followers, the righteous of all ages. This is a wonderful, wonderful story in the stars and completed also through the sanctuary in order to make us understand that there are two parties involved, and one is the great commander of the armies of heaven, and the second one is Lucifer that has been cast down to the earth with his followers. And now the showdown is finished, as we see in Revelation chapter 20, with the third coming of Christ and the second death. Interestingly, as you read even older books regarding the Bible, many people do agree with the second coming, but rarely mention the third coming, and yet it is very clearly shown in chapter 20 of Revelation. And this again is new light coming down to us from the Mazzaroth, from the sky, and also from the sanctuary. May the Lord be glorified. Section 3, Part 1, the Mazzaroth, the number and the names of the stars in prophecy. The International Astronomical Union and their man-made constellations is a type of those who fulfill the prophecy of the grape harvest and the prophecy of the tares. Revelation chapter 14, verses 18 to 20. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Trust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. First prophecy. Matthew chapter 13, verses 25 to 38 excerpts. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Second prophecy. Genesis chapter 7, verse 12. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Third prophecy. Numbers chapter 13, verse 25. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. Fourth prophecy. Numbers chapter 14, verses 33 and 34. And your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms, until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. Fifth prophecy. Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward an-hungered. Sixth prophecy. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Seventh prophecy. Continuing with Isaiah chapter 14, verse 16. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man or created being that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? Eighth prophecy. Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. 9. Prophecy. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. 10. Prophecy. Daniel chapter 12 verse 7, it shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. 11th prophecy. Revelation chapter 12 verses 14 to 17, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. 12th prophecy. Revelation chapter 20 verses 5 and 6. But the rest of the dead live not again, until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that has part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. 13. Prophecy. Revelation chapter 20 verses 14 and 15, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. 14. Prophecy. If you have received blessings through the research on Volume 1 of the Mazzaroth, we invite you to continue your research with Volume 2, Table of Contents, the Mazzaroth and the Sanctuary, the Great Controversy in the Mazzaroth. Section 1, Book 1, the list of the 4 cardinal constellations. Part 1, the structure of the first book of the Mazzaroth, his works. Part 2, the 3 compartments in the sanctuary, his word. Section 2, Book 2, the list of the 4 cardinal constellations. Part 1, the structure of the second book of the Mazzaroth, his works. Part 2, the 3 compartments in the sanctuary, his word. Section 3, Book 3, the list of the 4 cardinal constellations. Part 1, the structure of the third book of the Mazzaroth, his works. Part 2, the 3 compartments in the sanctuary, his word.